Community Engagement. I'm the Community Engagement Producer at WFAE, and on behalf of all of us at WFAE, welcome to the Charlotte Podcast Festival pop-up. We would love for you to ask your questions. Please ask your questions. Put them in the Q&A in the Zoom. You'll find it near the bottom of the screen. Feel free to introduce yourself and talk to other guests in the chat. And just a reminder, WFAE's ability to bring you this free festival session comes from listeners' support. Please donate any amount that this Giving Tuesday to support the festival and the programming that you love. You can also give online at WFAE.org and via Venmo at WFAE Radio. You can donate a cryptocurrency by searching WFAE at the Giving Block. A big thanks to our sponsors, Ortho Carolina and WFAE's partners in the festival, Blumenthal Performing Arts Center, Electics Creative Agency, and Queen City Podcast Network. I am very pleased to introduce our host for this session, Gracyn Doctor. She's the reporter, the Race and Equity reporter, part of the Race and Equity desk here at WFAE, and she uses her multimedia platform to cover stories for communities of color in the Charlotte area. So I'm leaving it up to you, Gracyn. Thank you.
Thanks, Dante, and welcome everyone to the 2021 Charlotte Podcast Festival. I'm Gracyn, as Dante mentioned, and I'm just going to take some time to introduce tonight's panel to you all. First, we have Dr. Shivani Mehta. She's a passionate pediatrician who devotes her time to advocating for children. She earned her medical degree from the University of Michigan and a master's in public health from the Harvard School of Public Health. She currently chairs the Clinical Implementation Work Group of the Carolinas Collaborative, a group that focuses on addressing food insecurity and other social determinants of health. She's also a wife and a mom of two. Next, we have Brandon Neal. He's a lawyer who's passionate about education, the arts, and urban development. He graduated from UNC Chapel Hill, but holds his JD from Duke University's School of Law. Today, Brandon serves on a number of boards, including being a vice chair of the National Urban League Board of Trustees and a vice chair for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools Foundation. He's a native of Charlotte, living in the city with his wife and two kids. And then finally, we have John Davis, who's a creative entrepreneur, a coach, and a consultant. He uses his natural gift of connecting people and creating space to exchange ideas to address challenges in Charlotte. John's big on community service and currently serves as the chair of the board of directors for communities in schools of Charlotte. He's also now involved in the Schools Reimagined, which is a program that invites students to give voice and choice in the development of a new educational model. John loves coffee and his sweet pup, Larry. So together, these three make up the Making Room podcast, a show that focuses on three ideas they believe are the key to accelerating community change. And those ideas are being a catalyst, honoring creativity, and leading with courage. So welcome, you guys. Today, we're going to discuss how the guests use their podcast to facilitate change and how we all can kind of do the same in our lives. So we will go ahead and get started. So you all are from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and yet you've come together to create this podcast under the mission of facilitating change and being a catalyst. So and you all built these real life connections through this. You've now become friends outside of the podcast. So Brandon, can you talk to us a little bit first about how you all met, and then how you use this podcast to create change in Charlotte?
Yeah, kick it to me first, huh, Gracyn?
Yes.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having us. It's great to be here and glad we can join and glad that this event is happening, and hope that many of you go out and start podcasts and be a voice for change and disconnection in our community. And that's really what we've tried to do. So we've gotten to know each other. So I actually got to know John through this very interesting group. And it's interesting that we put this on this panel podcast. About 8 years ago, two of our friends got together and said, you know what, we have a lot of conversations within each of our races. There was one black guy, one white guy, but we don't talk a lot with the other race. We don't ask the questions that we're afraid to ask. And so these guys put together a group of 7 Black guys, 7 white guys. We could expand our definition of diversity, but we started there. And the idea was that these guys would come together and really get to know each other and ask the tough questions. And so we spent a year, each guy doing their ESPN 30 for 30. If you've seen that show of, this is who I am, this is how I was raised, these are my values, and this is how I think the way I do. And any guy in the group could ask him a question about that. And your life was put under a microscope. And even the people that I hadn't known or had known for a very long time, I learned so much new from them. And so John was a member of that group, and I was a member of that group, and we went on and we became friends. And it's really a great testimony. I hope more of these groups pop up, because now our spouses are good friends. Our kids are growing up together. And we really just aren't afraid to have the tough conversations and ask the questions to get clarification. So we met through that group. And then John and I'll let him and Shivani talk about how they met, but I connected through Shivani through John, and just was blown away by all the things she's doing. And she works for a rival healthcare institution. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic too. And since then, we've all sort of grown together, and really this has become more than just a podcast to us.
Right. Yes, John, Shivani, please take it away.
Yeah, so I don't like to think of us as rivals. I think we're all friends, just doing different work.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. So around the same time that this men's group was happening, I was moving in with my husband to an apartment complex in South End. And lo and behold, it's a brand new apartment complex. And John was one of the other people in that first week of the brand new complex of moving in, who happened to be moving at the same time, happened to be next door, happened to have the exact same car in a different color as my husband. And, we knocked on the doors to each other, and we found that there were so many similarities between the things that we believed in, and the quotes on the walls, everything, down to the car. And I do enjoy cooking, and John will tell you, he tended to find out when mealtime was, or heard the blender rolling when morning smoothies were getting made, and just happened to show up when food was ready. So we bonded over food as well. And over time, we've really grown to see a lot of things in common. I certainly appreciate his passion in connecting with humanity, connecting with all walks of life, and really supporting children. And so I've since then joined him on the Communities and Schools board as well. But we get to collaborate on a lot of great things, including this podcast.
Yeah, I would just say that, yes, I did get really smart, because Shivani's cooking is amazing. So I would just knock on the door at 7 o'clock. What are you guys up to? Why does John show up at 7 o'clock all the time? So, and it's still a sore subject that Brandon he's had a little bit of her food, but
I've only had side dishes.
Yeah, just the side. But
COVID.
Oh yeah, sure.
But I think what you see on this panel are two people who have meant a great deal to me. They're like family. And it was probably 2 years ago, around the time of the pandemic, the racial reckoning, where Brandon and I were really talking, and I was in a really tough moment, and I had felt I had outgrown a career where I was at, but I was afraid to make a big shift. And he said something really powerful to me. He said, I think you're trying to shoehorn your purpose into this current work, and there's a bigger world and impact out for you. And so I think in what we've created together, the foundation before we even got together was that, we say a lot on the podcast, this idea of Ubuntu, the South African philosophy that means I'm only a person through other persons. So in my moment of challenge, Brandon was there for me. Through our men's group, he mentioned, I learned significant injustices that he continues to face as a Black man, whether it's the Black tax as a Black executive that's constantly included in D&I conversations, yet is trying to do his job, whether it's talking about conversations with police that I wouldn't have to have because of my white skin tone. And over time, we began to act as if we were each other. So not if Brandon was feeling pain, that I would feel that too. And so that reciprocated then, where he was there for me in this moment of my career and inspired me. And then I said, well, what about a podcast? we tend to jive really well. Like our group jokes, they're like, yeah, you all are always sitting next to each other. And there's a reason behind that, because his character and purpose is as high as I've ever met in my life. And when we also read that 80% of podcasts were male only, we started to think we kind of needed another leg to the stool, right? A tripod will fall over if it doesn't have a third leg. And Shivani, as you'll see, is just, her heart is so aligned and set of values to how we felt about giving back. She's a true catalyst and has meant a great deal to me personally as well. Her and her husband have been, as she calls, the ribs to protect me and keep me going, and also kind of my mom sometimes. She's actually downstairs in my house, so checking on me. But I would just think that we thought something really special could happen if the three of us came together. And that's the secret to it, that we came together in purpose, for a purpose, but we didn't really know what would happen. So that's sort of a little of the background.
Wow. It's a really beautiful story. Just the small ways that you can meet new friends, you know. So you guys talked a little bit about the motivation behind the podcast. You talked about why you chose a podcast. How do you all use this podcast to facilitate change in Charlotte, and in your own lives? How's it impacted you all individually? And Shivani, would you like to start off?
Sure. So, as we kind of thought through even the initial episode of just really thinking through our core values and what we really wanted this to be, I think we realized quickly we're not the experts in this, right? We don't do this every single day in every moment of our lives, and we don't teach this thing, but we know and we see so many beautiful examples of positive impact, beautiful humans seeing each other in one another and really elevating the community for the right purposes and bringing community along as we tell the stories. That we really wanted to highlight people who don't always get that platform, and really think through the idea of offering a space where maybe they don't otherwise have a chance to tell their story, and really hone in on that storytelling piece, right? We interact with people every single day in meetings, in conferences, at work, and we don't often take the time to really hear stories about human experience and why we got to the places that we are. And as we grow together and we bring on guests, we're really just storytelling. We're really asking these questions about how we came to the places that we are, and recognizing who helped us along the way, who supported us, who was a catalyst for us, and then really thinking through our purpose and what is it that we want out of life? What is it that we want to bring to the table? And how do we help bring others along? And again, we're not the experts in it. We just really enjoy hearing human stories and lifting those up. And hopefully that inspires deeper connections in other people as well, right? Hearing us share those stories and hearing other people talk about that. The goal is to really connect on that human level so that we can work together and we can elevate and do community work together.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that before, I think John will probably have the best insight in terms of everything that goes into the podcast that shows how we're not just talking about this, but we tried to model it, even in the three of us being here. And so, as Shivani said, we're not the experts in diversity, equity, inclusion, and we see the kind of scope a little bit broader than that. And I think we're in a place now where people are exhausted, and sometimes certain terms cause people to break down. And I hope certain terms of D&I didn't cause someone not to tune into this. But part of what we wanted to show is that connecting across differences is not hard. It's scary at first. It's uncomfortable. But once you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and I'll tell you, particularly for probably Shivani and I, doing a podcast was uncomfortable for us. It's outside of our wheelhouse. I think John is even outside of his. And so being uncomfortable with that process and not really knowing where it's going to go, but realizing I'm willing to take the step to get to know someone different, to talk to someone different, to model something different, and then just reaping the rewards from that. And we also, really quick, I'll also say, we just felt like in this time, if you just think through COVID and all the popular shows that are out there on Netflix that we binge watch, I love some Squid Game and the like, but it's just all traumatic, except for maybe like Ted Lasso and some other things. And so we wanted to just shine light on the light, as we say, just just tell what are these good positive stories and be real about them, not sugarcoat things, but tell positive stories that show the positivity that's out there too, that we can connect on, and just bring some of that into the world through this podcast. So that's what we're doing. And John, I'll let you chime in with the rest.
Absolutely. That I love the shining light on light. And I think we started out really looking at what are the three core principles, and Gracyn said those really well. We started with catalyst. So this idea of, scientifically, if you make room, that you can speed up the reaction, right? So for example, in community, why don't we ask people closest to problems to really help us solve those and create that agency? And the second thing is creativity, or honoring the way people see the world. So we've had Michaela Binter, who's an artist. We've had Nate Sally, who's a coach, but also a rapper. And then the third thing is courage, that we've got to have the character to honor, our values, even when it's hard. So our specific goal, Gracyn, was around, we really wanted to increase opportunities and access, especially across different backgrounds. And in Charlotte, per the Leading an Opportunity Task Force report, we're very good at, say, me sharing social capital with, my little brother. What we're not good at, which was in the report said could be transformative, was sharing social capital across communities, across different ethnicities, across socioeconomic backgrounds. So you'll see we were very deliberate in building the podcast. Our logo, the Making Room logo, that was built by a 17-year-old high school senior named Mitchell Watts, who was a designer. We used a local company, Queen City Podcast, to work with. We also had Brandy Edwards, who has a consulting arm. Our song was built by a Black female violinist and rapper and a white female pianist. And we didn't start with race and ethnicity. That's a big miss for, people say all the time in the world of inclusion. You start with hearts, you start with talent, you start with people who really want to create. And we wanted to have some enthusiasm with this brand. And that was all part of it. That's why we use those words. But, our first guest was a Furu co-brewer. She's a 17-year-old high school senior at Harding. And her goal in life, mine was to increase my bench press. Hers was to start a human revolution of love. I mean, let that sink in at 17 years old. She overcame stage 4 cancer at 2 years old. She has been an absolute catalyst in my life. So I think as Brandon and Shivani said, what we miss sometimes in this building connections is we each benefit. My heart has widened the more I've learned about Shivani's culture, the chance I've had to celebrate Diwali with her and her family. I've gotten to pick up Kavi at Taekwondo, and he thinks Uncle Johnny is really cool, which is awesome because not everyone thinks that. And I think that's the big thing about this, is just how you do it, how it's made. Over 50% of our expense spend is by women and people of color. We track our expense spend. So we're not just talking about this. We're looking at how do we create an opportunity? So how it's made for us is more important than the end product.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. You guys are just really kind of putting your money where your mouth is, and you've had some super powerful episodes. Like you mentioned, you spoke to Nate Sally. You talked to him about, when life calls you to a different path. You've spoken about unlocking your strengths and acting on your purpose. So talk to us a little bit now about how you all go about choosing such diverse topics and such strong topics. I mean, even sharing your social capital, right? I feel like that's something that not many people may think about, expanding that into a podcast episode. So how do you go about choosing your topics and even your guests? Why is it important for you all to have such a diverse selection of guests? Why do you take the time to make room for different people? I know that's a couple questions in one, sorry. Brandon, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I can start, and then let Shivani or John jump in. Let me first say, so John spoke very highly of me, and probably undeservedly so at the beginning, and I really appreciate that. But I would say a lot of this.
No, sorry, very deservedly. Okay.
I appreciate that. I'll pay you later. I think so John, and part of how I knew he was kind of shoehorning his purpose into this job was that he's been on this journey of figuring out how can he help people. And so all the people that he mentioned, he's had some interactions with them and connected us, Shivani and I, to them, and we've been connected. So a lot of the guests are people that John has just met from stepping outside of his comfort zone. I would say other people that we've had that we all know, it's really trying to get people two things in my mind, and it may differ. I think we all have different opinions, but in my mind, it's getting voices that people may not know about. Like these are voices and people in our community doing the really great work every day that you may not see, but they're doing really great work to help move our city forward. Like a Khalil Lloyd and Lloyd Visuals, in the video production they do, and all the opportunities they're giving a lot of people of color who want to be in the production industry. And so we really wanted to highlight those voices. And then we wanted to also highlight the people. And it's not just, we're just going to get the most powerful influencer out there, right? It's who's actually living the values that you mentioned at the top, Gracyn, who's embodying those three things in our community that we also want to highlight and show that this is connection throughout differences. So I'll stop there. And I know Shivani and John have more to add.
I'll ask the doctor to go next.
I'll just echo Brandon. I think, again, John lives and breathes this every single day and brings us people who he has interacted with. I joke that he'll like find deep connection at the cashier when he's at a store and somehow has found this like human soul connection with someone, but he has opened that world up to us as well. And so we get this opportunity to really ask the questions and hear the stories and form those deep human connections with the guests that he's often found for us and has already made these connections with. I think similarly also we wanted to make sure, again, we could have a podcast episode with a super famous influencer and have a lot of viewers, but that wasn't necessarily the purpose of why we wanted to come together. We really wanted to be able to speak from the community, of the community, and really highlight voices of everyone, not just the typical players in the game.
Yeah, and I think to your learning point, Gracyn, I love that question. It's been, and thank you all for what you just said. It's that for me, like growth is just so exciting, right? The chance to grow. And I think about like somebody like Nate, right? Who was a 3-time All-American for Ohio State, played for the Panthers. He probably is the most known person, but Nate also has connected with the Furu. He's connected with other, guests of ours. And so it's very specific that people who also would maybe create an opportunity as well once they knew as what we were doing, or would promote somebody else that we were talking about. We talk about the idea that we like to interview people who will be champions of each other and humanity. And I think the central premise around how we've selected guests, to Shivani's point, yes, if I meet a cashier and, in our community, I wish more that once we see something that we couldn't unsee it. And, once I began to learn about the depths of injustices in our Black community initially, and 400 years of dehumanization and oppression. And if we look at even, say, Lee Elder, who passed away this past week, who was the first Black golfer to break through at the Masters. And we tend to say he was the first this instead of saying how great of a golfer he was. And all I could think about when we were preparing, Gracyn, I remember talking to you, is what was it like for him to have to have 2 homes, and be afraid for his life while he was playing golf. And I think we tend to, people that maybe might look like me, when you start to learn about the depths of all the different iterations of dehumanization and injustice, not just in our Black community, immigrant, sexual orientation, all the different dimensions of diversity, like shame can come over. It can come over that I don't feel that too. And we wanted to create, and I saw a question in the chat, a way to act, right? A way to really think about, instead of staying in, gosh, I don't experience that, what might be possible if I widened my heart? And I think about, say, Jamie Horn, one of our guests, who's a trainer and is doing some incredible work about including people with adaptive needs in her workouts. And one of the reasons we interviewed her is gosh, I'm not thinking about having somebody in a wheelchair at my workouts, but I was so moved, I'm doing burpees and here's a young woman chanting stuff out. And Jamie says it's the highlight of her, her year. And so what we found in this connection, though, a lot of people would, I'll call it really gentle, kind hearts who are reaching across communities, sometimes might have some fear in speaking publicly because there's a ton of nasty stuff out there with people say, oh, you're not doing it this way. So we've also said, we're not trying to say we're right, another group is wrong, is that we've got to hold tension more and that each person has value. Activists have value, corporate has value, creatives have value, but we've got to begin to listen to me where the pain and suffering is coming from and focus efforts there.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for that answer. We do have a question from the audience. So this person asks, says the country is going through a lot of racial tension and divisiveness. How do you all keep the subjects you're talking about from being so heavy all the time? And Shivani, would you like to answer this one first?
Sure. So both of you guys unmuted too. I'll let you guys go in a second. I think part of it is that, again, we have developed this like beautiful friendship. And so we can joke around and we can keep things light, but also we want to highlight the good. We want to highlight the love, the deep human spirit, the good, positive things that are happening, that it's not always just focusing about all these negative, awful things that we are experiencing, but that there are these hopeful stories. There are these wonderful, positive things and human beings that we get to interact with, and really breaking down some of that unknown or that fear by hearing and opening up and allowing that story to be told so that we can just work on seeing each other, right? And welcoming each other.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's not to say we don't address it, right? We do address it. But as I think about it, particularly from the perspective of a Black male, what I'm looking at when I go back to the history and just going back to all the things like Tulsa, is really I see you, I understand, or I empathize with you, right? I get that. And we have that basis. And so then it becomes, once you get that and you operate from that common understanding, it becomes, well, what can we do about it, right? And really just focusing in more on realizing that it very much at the national level, a lot of political level, and even race in its origin was created to divide us, right? And so we could focus on those divisions, and we do when we need to, but I think there's more power in focusing on what is our natural inclination to want to be together and connected. And that's what you see. And that's when the emotion, when you see some of these people come together, or people talk about when they hear our opening song on the podcast, or see these two women from different backgrounds working together, that feeling that you feel, that's that natural connection that we were intended to have to bring this together, but man-made systems have driven us apart, right? And so that's why we keep it light, is because we focus on, we're not going down that path, right? Of we're focusing on you as a human being, and you have your different perspective, I have my different perspective, but there's so much more, as Maya Angelou says, there's so much more alike that we have than we have different. And that's what we have tried to focus on to keep it somewhat light. And like I said, most of the time when in doubt, we just joke on John. So
yeah, which there's plenty of material. So I still they haven't made room for my singing contract, which is difficult, Gracyn. We probably don't want to do that tonight, but I would say, I mean, look, I think the tendency too, when you see the three of us on the surface, would be like, oh, I bet they're talking about race. And a lot of times we're not, like we're being human beings. And so I think, I remember Brandon and I had a conversation, is that we'll know we get past this when every book about race and oppression isn't by a person of color, right? Is that maybe that's a book I should write about my journey, and Brandon or Shivani writes the leadership book, right? But we tend to have that flipped. So I think, us just navigating life as humans, and yeah, laughter is also just so important, like you'll hear us, like our last episode that came out. I mean, we are cutting on each other, and it's fun. And I do think if we're going to energize each other and have stamina for change, we've got to laugh. We've got to be able to make mistakes. I mean, I've said things that, oh yeah, no. And yeah, okay, well, we would but you got to learn together. And I think that's what we miss. So finding people that you can laugh with. And, you know, I do sing some karaoke from time to time, and it's very good.
Yeah.
Different
Yeah, no, I think
perspective on
that's-
the good, Gracyn.
Yeah.
Just
What?
flag different
Where
perspective on the
we
good.
can disagree on different opinions
Yeah.
and points of view and still be close and friends.
But, you know, I think that's just the beauty of it all. You come together, you know, under this mission, and you find that you have so many different things in common. You know, you're actually more alike than you are different. And so before we talk about being a catalyst, because we've talked about that, you know, we mentioned that word a few times. There is one more question from the audience. Has there been a common thread among the issues that you discuss on your podcast, especially since the pandemic? And John, do you want to take this one first?
You know, what's interesting is I felt because part of our structure has been kind of unique and fun. You know, I mean, I'm trying to keep this going. I'm the full-time entrepreneur. We've got a full-time pediatrician and a full-time, you know, legal counsel at a major healthcare system. So we've had to be very thoughtful with how we record. So a lot of times we record the first hour, and the second hour, the three of us just talk. So you'll see half our episodes are a guest, half is just us. And so I think we've talked a lot about what's been different for you. You know, what has the pandemic caused you to think differently? And, you know, for me, just getting grounded and stronger in who I am and my own voice. And then, you know, just trying new things like this. So that's definitely been a common thread, I feel like, is that what are we learning together? And then also, like, what does it really take to really use your voice, and that our voices can be used in different ways. And I love, Shivani says this a lot about courage, that sometimes courage is not you saying it. Sometimes courage is you saying, you know what, hey, Brandon, Shivani, I'm getting ready to make a big speech about public education. Will you stand with me? Right. And I think we miss that sometimes. So that's been a big thread too, is, you know, change happens too when we show up big. It doesn't always mean you have to be the one speaking.
Yeah, wow. One more question from the audience before we actually go into being a catalyst. How do you all promote your podcast to attract listeners? Brandon, do you want to answer this one?
Well, okay, John. We probably still a work in progress, but John, I know John's on all the different platforms. So,
you know, we're not ideally great at that. What we've done is we did talk to some social media experts, and we went with one channel. We went with Instagram because it's sort of what we were comfortable with, and so we've promoted that. We also made a deliberate decision to film it too. So it's on YouTube. So we thought there was something powerful in people seeing our faces. You know, if you go and you see the episode where Brandon and Afuru, and he's telling her how he hopes his daughter, you know, is like her one day. And, you know, that's a theme too. I didn't mention, people get pretty moved on our podcast. You know, we also have fun. You know, Nate Sally went to Ohio State. We played the Michigan fight song just to mess with him. You know, it was hilarious. And so, and then we've also tried to really highlight all our guests. So, you know, LP7 and Britt Drozda like ended up recording a song that was just for our welcome music that now is on Spotify. I mean, it's called Welcome, and it's amazing. And so it's on our link tree. You can find it on our site. So we had an event to highlight when that went live on Spotify, and talked about how much it meant to us. And so I think our promotion has been a bit more through promoting our guests and seeing how, you know, we helped Afuru raise money for her college tuition, and she's going to A&T in the spring. And she's done that all on her own, but we've tried to really promote by being catalysts.
yeah, and I will add, I do have something to add, Gracyn. Everything John said, and I also, Shivani, not to speak for you, but I'll speak for you a little bit, in that, you know, we do have these other full-time jobs and very, very busy. And so for us, it's more in the meaning, and we sometimes check ourselves into why we're doing this work and not necessarily to grow the followers. One of the themes, I'll link to the previous question, one of the things that comes through all this through me, through the pandemic, is purpose, and reevaluating that purpose and being clearer on that purpose on the other side of this pandemic, because you see everything going around you and everything's resetting and changing. And so for us, you know, I believe that we are, if you continue to go down this path, that we will be where we need to be. And of course, we do need to reach out, and we do the social media, but it's been a lot of word of mouth. And because the people who need to find it have sort of gravitated toward it, we've been successful in that regard. And then we'll continue to hone in on it. But it's really been sort of, I did want to highlight the purpose point to the last question. And I don't know if Shivani has anything else to add.
I totally agree. I think, you know, this process, particularly being a physician in the pandemic, like, it's hard. And there's not that there was this like wealth of time, but the process of actually even just thinking through an episode and actually being in the room, being able to turn, you know, my phone off and be present with people, has been healing. And it's all about, you know, we talk a lot about process and growth, and it's really that, right? So even if, you know, heaven forbid this doesn't happen, but even if nobody ever listened, like, I think the three of us would just, we really enjoy the process, and it's really been helpful and eye-opening for us. And then hopefully for the guests that have been coming on as well, that we really are just growing together and learning together and understanding and seeing each other. So I think part of that enthusiasm then probably kind of spills out into the episode as well, and attracts folks.
Yeah, I definitely think it does. I think all of that really comes through when you listen to you guys, listen to an episode. For sure, I know for me, I can feel the joy, you know, even in listening to some episodes recently, you know, they really inspired me in different ways, or in ways that I didn't even expect. So I will say it definitely comes through the podcast. So we're about halfway through the session now. I do want to shift gears just a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit more about what it means to be a catalyst for change. Shivani, would you like to break down the definition of what a catalyst is, and then tell us, like, what does that mean to be a catalyst of change? How are you using yourself as an example?
You guys, the boys are laughing because I love talking about this word. So as the science geek in the group, I like to take us back to the scientific definition of what a catalyst is, because I think it helps highlight what we mean when we think about it in a social or a community capacity. So a catalyst is really just a substance that helps increase the rate of our reaction, a chemical reaction, to happen. And it does this by potentially decreasing the amount of energy that it takes for that reaction to happen. The catalyst might morph in the process of that reaction, but then it always goes back to its original form. It always gets regenerated. So there's no permanent shift, no permanent change. It's not consumed. Nothing is taken away from that catalyst. And so when we think about it from a social change or a community aspect, being a catalyst, whether that is a person, a moment, an event, an invitation, that catalyst is able to move along a reaction, a change potentially in the community or in a person's life without having taken away from itself, right? It's not losing anything. And maybe that change was going to happen anyway. Maybe that person was going to be able to connect to that organization and have a voice, but the catalyst just decreased the amount of energy that it took. It made it easier. It made it faster so that we can continue to mobilize. And it doesn't take away. You know, I think the added definition might be that being a catalyst, sometimes you know that you're doing it. Sometimes we don't even know that it's happening. But in the moments where we do recognize what's going on, I feel like the catalyst probably gets a little bit better, right? You feel good when you're able to do those things. And that's not why the catalyst does it, but it just kind of automatically happens. And so I think when we think about it from a social impact standpoint, right? Even if we think through the idea of social capital, right? If I am at a meeting and I'm just inviting somebody who would never have been able to be at that meeting just to sit at the table, even if they didn't say a word during that meeting, but they were able to make an interaction happen, and that then mobilized and catalyzed another reaction or another interaction for that person, that's moving the needle for change and for improving and helping our community to grow.
And I love, by the way, I love when she talks about catalyst. It's really awesome. That's why you saw us cheering, because there's no one who can talk about it better. And I think for me, a practical example of that. And I think sometimes when we create opportunities or once you've had success, it can seem like I've got to hold on to that. And I think, especially in the US, we've got to do better about opening up and having this mindset of abundance. And so for me personally, what was very transformative and part of the reason Afubru and I became so close, one of our first guests, is we were part of Communities in Schools' Difference Makers program, which brought together 18 community leaders and 18 students to really be change agents around what the students wanted. And we flew to Washington, D.C. to see the Museum of African American History and Culture. And Brandon was there too. And I was actually assigned, Afubru was in my small group, to debrief the delegation's experience post the museum. And what happened is if you've been to that museum, it's incredibly powerful. And the last thing you see is the Emmett Till Memorial. And I was standing there with Ernest Winston, our current superintendent, who's a Black man. And we were present to Emmett Till's mom and what it took for her to make the decision for that to be an open casket. And it was only 2 weeks earlier where Ernest had received threats on his life because of his skin tone, and he was the first Black superintendent. And we hugged. And he said, "I'll be okay. Sometimes I'm afraid for my daughters." And I'm in tears, he's in tears. And the heaviness we felt leaving that museum was like, I didn't feel I was ready to go facilitate this session. What was interesting was the students were all like, yeah, we've seen this, we've got it. Like they were ready to go, which, if you look at the civil rights movement, it was young people who really catalyzed things in their early 20s. So I went up to Afubru and I just saw what was happening, and I knew our group needed hope. I knew they needed her voice. It was almost like a spiritual thing. And I said, "You're ready for this." We had talked about facilitation techniques. She's a natural. And I just said, "I'll start off with you, but this is your show." And in that moment, to Shivani's point, nothing was taken away from me, but all my training had been, there's all these executives here and people, I got to grab the reins. But what was catalytic for the group was her spirit and energy. And we were there for the youth. And maybe that's, if we in the community started to think about who we're there for, it might make that a little bit easier. And I talk about that all the time because that began a chain reaction where I just looked for those moments everywhere of what's this person interested in? And the three of us really share that way of leading.
Yeah, and I have nothing to add. That was just so well done. I would just say one of the things we emphasize, similar to the how do you not make this so heavy point, is that there is a benefit in what people view as sacrifice or not being comfortable, right? And so the whole definition, Shivani's definition of catalyst, in that it doesn't take away from itself and you don't lose anything, but you might gain something. In that moment that John just mentioned, I mean, it probably made him prouder. If he had talked about it, we probably would not be talking about that moment today, right? And I've thought about teams at points in my life with my team and leaders, and how much better it feels after I've given someone else a spotlight and they knock it out of the park compared to if I did it myself, right? And so that's what this is, that's what I would say this is really all about. It's just breaking down that traditional notion of what it means to give sacrifice or make room for someone else, and how that also benefits you and makes your life more fulfilling.
Yeah, because that's the interesting thing about it. It's like it's not about benefiting you, but in turn, you are benefited in positive ways. You're uplifted, you're inspired, you're motivated. So we've spoken also too about stepping outside of your comfort zone. So I want to know how can people step outside of their comfort zone and facilitate change in their own lives? How do they overcome that fear? Maybe they want to start a podcast specifically on this subject or something similar. How do they kind of overcome that fear? How did you guys overcome that and step outside of your comfort zone to do this?
Me, I'll kick it off. Oh no, Shivani, you kick it off.
I was just going to joke and say they made me do it.
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar. John kind of made me do it, but I think it is just that, just stepping outside of your head and just taking the risk, right? And just, there's something, and I know people who are listening, there's something that there's probably, and it may be a podcast if you're joining this, that you feel like for a long time that you're supposed to do. And it's in the back of your head and you find excuse after excuse after excuse to do it. But then one day you can't make any more excuses. And so I think you just have to go and realize and give yourself grace that it's not going to be perfect, that it's a work in progress. As John and Shivani and I talk about a lot, it's not making it to the top of the mountain, but it's how you climb the mountain. And so realizing the journey is more important than destination. And you may start that you can't get to the fourth step until you take the first step, right? You can't get to the finish line until you take the first step. So I would say that's the big part of it. One of the other just very practical examples I'll tell you, we mentioned food. We had one episode where we had Daniel Valdez, who is a community leader and also a bit of a chef himself. And he made homemade tortillas for us. And I've always gotten my tortillas from Harris Teeter and the other wherever Whole Foods, wherever you shop. And having that homemade tortilla, I was like, this is amazing. And so the next time I drove by a Latin American restaurant or a Latin American grocery that I had been seeing every time I commute to where I see it, and I never had the courage to go in there. But because I connected with Daniel and because I had this experience, I said, you know what? I'm going in there. I'm going in there. And I was the only person. They were very kind to me. I could not speak Spanish. I spoke enough for probably to embarrass myself. But it was just a great experience. And my kids loved the tortillas, right? They ate them without any cheese on them. They were just gobbling them down. And it was just, that's the experience, just being curious enough and being courageous enough to just say, I'm going to take a chance.
I would say anyone on here thinking about starting a podcast, nobody can say what you can say better than you. And one of our producers, Brian Baltashevitz, told us one time, there's 1,000 reasons you can say no and come up with different reasons, but not as many for you to say yes. And I love this quote from the founder of LinkedIn, who said, if you aren't embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. Right. So like for us, we had to settle in and we get into things like, we got to promote this, we got to do this more. And we'd occasionally settle back in to say, no, this is about us learning. This is about us taking chances. And if we're going to talk about this with our kids and our friends and our family, like we have to do it first. We have to honor these 3 principles. Are we being courageous? Are we being creative? And are we being catalysts? So we constantly look at that. And so I think the best thing about podcasts is you can record it, you can go edit it. There's an episode, there's one we haven't used because things got really personal, and there's, things that we didn't think we'd say that we did put out there. So I just think like especially the US, we've got to try things more and create spaces and putting people around you, in this case, we have 3 co-hosts. You don't always have to do that. But for me, that was super important to grow with people that I really respected. But if you are doing it by yourself, get some people that listen to it for you, that believe in you, that will push you, that also will challenge you. And it's just important to have champions, for your voice and what you are capable of.
I'd say to that also, being able to speak about what you want to do, if it's a podcast idea, talking to the people who know and love you. And when they will hear that passion and that spark in you, you will automatically create this like voice of courage that's going to be helping support you through that process. Brandon and I also talk about like how we interact and think about how we parent, right? So the advice that we give our kids, just, you can do it, be brave, you can have that courage, it's okay, you can try, it's okay to make a mistake. All those things echo for us in adulthood, but oftentimes people don't tell us that, right, anymore. We don't get told it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay, try it.
Yeah. And then what'll happen is when you try things, like I got texts from my mom to be like, yeah, podcast is pretty good. Shivani's voice is lovely. Well, so we get that a lot.
Yeah. And I would say, and that's, again, going back to this whole premise of this, just thinking about having Shivani's voice. And we've gotten that from a lot of people. And I don't think we would be complete. We've actually talked about if Shivani's out there, we're not complete. Right. And so that's the beauty of what we're talking about in inclusion.
Yeah.
You guys are so great.
So you guys kind of jumped into my last question, which was any advice for anyone wanting to start their own podcast. But we'll kind of let you guys have your final answer on that in just a moment. We do have one more question from the audience. Do you all ever censor yourselves? Like, do you ever have a moment where you look at each other and say, that's TMI?
You kick that one off. I say it because I'm probably the most sensitive. I'm the attorney of the group, and there are and for historical reasons, there's certain things that I say and don't say. But for the most part, we do let it flow. I mean, in the moment, we sort of let it flow. If there are things, and I would say, I don't know, Shivani, how you feel about this, but I know John, for me at least, has been very gracious because he appreciating that we're in different spots. Things that he would probably just go and say, I don't see any problem with this. He's very gracious to say, hey man, this is how it sounded when I listened to it. Are you okay with this? Do you want to edit it? And we try to do it in a way that doesn't affect the substance, right? And I would say the times we do, we want to not. I would say it's around just making sure we're true to connecting with people and not alienating people, but bringing people together. But also keeping it authentic in a way that, you're going to get some. I saw in the chat, someone said they're learning a lot. Hopefully you'll learn from our experiences, but also do it in a way that you feel good and you feel inspired coming out of it.
Yeah. And I would say to that, sometimes we do, but it's okay. Right. Like I've shared a ton of personal things, with different, traumas and challenges and, different things I've grappled with in my life. And yeah, sometimes we're like, whoa, but it's like, we're human beings, and so what you probably hear in our episodes, I bet that's 90% just there. Like we edit very little. Where we have has been like where maybe we talk about a person or a detail about something and we're like, you know what, I didn't really check with that person and this is probably not appropriate. They may be going through something. And so I think it's really, we use the word honor a lot. Hey, did we honor the guest, or did we honor that person I just mentioned in the detail? And did I check with them on that? So I think it's different when it's us versus somebody else or somebody really close to us. So we do, take a look at that.
Yeah, that kind of makes me want to ask you guys something I thought about earlier. Do you all have any kind of do you have a briefing session or anything before you record just to kind of go over maybe what you're going to discuss, maybe some talking points, maybe, so you have those conversations beforehand, like, okay, this is what we can talk about. This is what I don't want you to mention. How does that work for you all?
So I would say we have a process with guests where typically because of their schedules, I'm connecting with the guest. We're talking about our themes. I'm trying to get to know their story and I'm synthesizing what aligns. And we also ask every guest what makes you feel inspired, what's success for you. So we do that. We put that in a little outline. And honestly, we go in through like a couple stories and then we just get into a conversation. We sit outside of Advent co-working space where the studio is, and we look at a document and a bio of the person. And then a story or two cues that, then we just get into it, kind of monitor the time. And then literally right after that, we just debrief it. And we're like, hey, what'd you get out of that? But we try to make the second one, yes, it is a quote debrief, but we were very intentional with Brandy and Brian to where those are standalones. But a lot of, for us, we wanted it to feel real. So it's like you're like having a cup of coffee with us.
All right, and then we have about 5 minutes left. So if each one of you could share just your final piece of advice for anyone who may be wanting to start a podcast, and specifically a podcast about facilitating some kind of change or creating change in their lives, what would you suggest? And John, we can just go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I think what we found is first establishing some key core values. And when we were able to establish, so anyone who's facilitating the change, establishing those values, And then ensuring that you're really honoring those personally, because it'd be hard for us to talk about anything that we weren't out doing. And I think then just really thinking about what are some of the goals in mind, for us, increasing opportunities and access was a big goal. So that led us to not seek out maybe the person with a huge platform, but then realizing we kind of need to, because that's going to help some of our guests who might not have a bigger social media following, and it's going to help people get to them from an artistic standpoint or a speaking standpoint. So those are the things I think, starting out with some of your goals and then giving yourself plenty of room to pivot. We did that several times. We brought the music portion, the food in, and just to try some things. We recorded at my house, like Brandon said, and we're talking about immigration and welcoming communities and making corn tortillas. And that was really cool. And so I think just plenty of opportunity to experiment as well.
I guess I can go next and let Shivani close us out as our closer. I would just pick up again and just emphasize courage and grace as the two themes, right? So courage, just being willing to try new things, willing to be uncomfortable, or being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and realizing you are going to make mistakes, but just try it. If you're thinking about it so long, there's nothing really holding you back. You can get a microphone and start small. But just try something else. Just record something on your own and see how you like it, right? And then see if other people like it, as John mentioned. I do think it would be helpful to think about just sort of how often you want to put these out, and just think about your schedule and your life and capacity and what else you have going on, and can you keep that commitment going? Which we have found a nice balance to do, and a way to do that, largely to John's credit. So I would do that. And then I would also, as John mentioned in the answer to the last question, is that we do have some structure, but we have enough flexibility. And that's where I would go to Grace, enough flexibility that if we need to pivot, or if we don't have it completely scripted, it's okay. Because there's no one grading you, right? There's no one grading us. There's no one saying, you guys didn't do it right this time, right? You are free to do this how you would like. And when you're true to that, you can do that. And as John mentioned, just thinking about your goals and what is your purpose, and making sure, especially if you're going to have people on, you're going to have guests on, make sure they're aligned. For other podcasts, maybe you don't need to do this, but if you're talking about making change, make sure they're aligned with what you're trying to do, and they're aligned with your purpose and your goals, because we could be on here talking about courage and being a catalyst, and then the person we had on is out here taking opportunities from people, right? And not being a good citizen. And then you sort of have contradicted everything you have put out into the world. So just think about that. But all I can say is just go do it, have courage, and give yourself some grace and permission to make mistakes.
Definitely echo, the courage and the humbleness of being able to be okay with it might not work out the way that you want. But I think going into anything really, but as you're thinking through a podcast, really diving into your purpose. Why is it that I want to do this? What is it that I want to share with the world, or with my community? And understanding, remembering again, that you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to have all of the answers. Just a little bit of humility and some curiosity, right? To explore, to learn, to grow together, particularly as we're thinking about community change. And then honing back to that. So as you start the process and you are having episodes come out, like really cycling back to what that purpose was. What am I doing? What I wanted to do? Am I effectively doing it? Does it still feel good? Because if it doesn't feel good, if it doesn't bring you joy, if it's not bringing more to your purpose, then why do it? And so if you have to pivot, you pivot, but really thinking through the why and what is it that drives you? What is it that burns that fire for you, so that you can bring that to the floor authentically and really know, okay, this is something that I'm going to say no to. This is something that I want to say yes to. This is what I want to bring in. And this is what I need to kind of hold to the side so that I can have some boundaries to really hone into my purpose, and being okay with saying no, and being okay with making a mistake along the way.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. This has been such a great conversation. And just thank you for being here. For everyone, tomorrow we have 2 more sessions going on. There's Finding Happiness and Health Through Podcasting, which is going to be at 12 p.m. And then there's the podcast pop-up happy hour, which is tomorrow from 6 to 7. Both are virtual. And for more information, you can go to charlottepodcastfestival.com. And that is all for us tonight. Everyone have a great night, and thank you so much for attending.
Thank you all.